Hello everybody and welcome along to this video, which is Mr. Johnson teaches the semicolon. So I'm presuming you're watching this video as you might want some help with the semicolon. It's definitely a really useful piece of punctuation. It's quite a flexible piece of punctuation, but it's certainly one which is more advanced. So if you take your full stops, your commas as your basics, then the semicolon is the next level up. And as you are watching this video, I'm presuming you want to improve your writing skills a bit. By using the semicolon correctly, you really show your writing to be that little bit more advanced. It has a certain drama to it, is what I would say, the semicolon, as you'll see in some of the examples. So you'll need to be ready to pause this video as we go through. Making notes is always a good idea. Watching this video, fine, but as you write things down, you're committing them to your memory much better. So absolutely worth having a pen and paper, but also there are some exercises at the end of this video for you to have a go at to see if you've understood the semicolon as well. So as I've put in the top right hand corner of that slide, so much more than a winky face, and let's move on and see why, eh? Now, to understand the semicolon, we just have to go over a few quick, I'm going to call them basics. You might still find them tricky, but they are basics, parts of sentences. To understand how a semicolon works and where you're going to put it, you need to know that sentences are divided into clauses. Sometimes a sentence is one clause, sometimes sentences are multiple clauses. What is a clause? It's the part of a sentence and it has a verb in it. So it has the action or doing word, as you're about to see in my example. So clauses, let's hold that information there a minute. There's one clause. We went to the beach. Why is it a clause? It's got a verb in it. The action word there, went, which comes from to go. So we went to the beach. There's your clause. It's one sentence. It's one clause. So far, so straightforward. So let's now move on to a slightly longer example then. Still thinking about clauses here before we get to semicolons. We went to the beach and played volleyball. So look at that sentence yourself. Decide how many clauses you're going to see there. How many verbs can you see? And I think I've made that fairly straightforward for you. There's your two verbs, either side of, so went we had before, and now we've got the extra clause on there, and played volleyball. We've got that extra, if you like, piece of information. And this time, the two clauses are joined together by a connective, which you might call a conjunction. So think of it like glue. It's gluing the two clauses together to make one long sentence. It's what you would call a compound sentence, a compound made up of two different things. We went to the beach and played volleyball. So far there we are, we're moving towards the semicolon here. Hopefully that sort of refreshes your understanding of clauses. It's something that you will have gone over at primary school and no doubt have heard at secondary school, possibly forgotten if you're like some of my students that I teach. Now think about commas. Where do they come in before we move to semicolons? Commas are like the boundaries between clauses. Think of them like the wall, the dividing wall. Because if we don't have those commas there, we just spill. If we read that first sentence on the example, for example, you spill over if you don't pay attention to the comma. Despite the pouring rain, they chose not to wear coats. Okay, you can almost understand that. But there are also many other examples without commas and breaks and those boundaries, as I've just said. It's too long. So look at the commas here. They are dividing the clauses. Despite the pouring rain, they chose not to wear coats. It had rained the day before and the forecast had made it clear it would today. Perhaps it was because their friends didn't wear coats. Perhaps it was because they didn't care. So there you go. You've got actually a listing thing going on there. The two perhapses. The comma in that sentence is actually dividing up the list. And in the final example here, you'll see it again dividing two clauses, one of which is a subordinate clause. It did mean that when they arrived at school, they were soaked, which meant the rest of the day was miserable. So here I am looking at this one. So when they arrived at school, it meant the rest of the day was miserable. So what we've got there is that subordinate clause. That comma there is marking the division between this idea, this clause, this subordinate clause. So that's a bit of a refresh. But think about the times. Now what I will often see, and this may be you, people use commas when they want to divide something, but sometimes commas aren't enough, like this example here. So where we've got John finished all his homework, Katie did not finish hers. Okay, the comma's okay there, but it could be better, it could be stronger. Yet, if we move on here, without this, without the comma, you could use the connective here, but John finished all his homework, but Katie did not finish hers. Perfectly decent sentence, that one, works well. This is where a semicolon could work, because we've got John finished all his homework, clause number 1, Katie did not finish hers, clause number 2. How about we use the semicolon? John finished all his homework. Katie did not finish hers. Now what we've got there is a slightly different tone, a slightly different sound to that sentence. It almost is saying that Katie should have been doing her homework and didn't. And just that semicolon, it changes the way that I read it. Now some of my students don't notice this when they read, but trust me, the more you read, the more you pay attention to punctuation and see it's telling you to do slightly different things, like that semicolon there. The thing I would like to point out at this point in the video is look at the semicolon. It's made up of a full stop and a comma. In some ways that could be a full stop between those two clauses, in some ways it could be a comma. Full stop is too strong, comma's not enough. I sometimes teach my students that you could look at it as a bit of both. Also, sometimes these semicolons can replace connectives like but. It's the identical sentence, but what I've got here is I've got the pause of the semicolon instead of an extra word. But let's move on. So, the rain had poured all day yesterday. Today seemed to be even worse. I've got clause number 1 making sense. I've got clause number 2. They're roughly the same sort of length as well. You don't have to count the words to make use of a semicolon, but roughly speaking they're the same. Look at this example then. When they arrived at school they were soaked, the rest of their day was damp and miserable. Too much. There needs to be punctuation in that sentence. Let's read it again. Listen how it's too much information. There needs to be a boundary. When they arrived at school they were soaked, the rest of their day was damp and miserable. Think. You could pause the video here if this would help, but look at that and decide where is the boundary between clause number 1 and clause number 2, because there are two clauses, two ideas in this sentence. And they are? When they arrived at school they were soaked, so there's my first idea. The rest of their day was miserable. It moves on to talk about the rest of the day. So we've got arriving at school part 1, the rest of the day part 2. We need a boundary between those. Now I've just added a comma in over here. When they arrived at school they were soaked, the rest of their day was damp and miserable. Comma's too weak there. It doesn't have a strong enough pause. Semicolon, like I've just added in there, now we do. When they arrived at school they were soaked, the rest of their day was damp and miserable. It adds that slightly stronger pause. So it's time for you guys to have a go at this now. I have some sentences here on the screen which are in need of semicolons. You'll work out where the semicolon goes by reading the sentence aloud to yourself and then deciding where does it move from clause 1 to clause 2. You're going to want to pause this video at this point. I'm going to go quiet for 10 seconds in a moment just to make sure you have paused it, and then I'm going to go through the answers. Write the sentences down. You could just read them on the screen, but that is not making it go into your brain. You need to use your muscles here, quite literally your hand muscles. Write each sentence down and then add the semicolons as you're going. All 5 examples. I'm going to go quiet for a moment to give you a chance to pause, and then we'll come back and go through the answers. Right. There you go. I'm presuming you've paused. You should now have in front of you 5 sentences with semicolons inside of them. Let's go through them one by one. So number 1 is, the boy had been sadly neglected. He was in an awful state. Now we've got him being neglected and being in an awful state. So watch, they're going to appear on the screen. Goes after neglected there. Number 2, John opened the drawer. The prize diamond was missing. So we've got John opening the drawer, which has got the verb opened. So that's the first clause. The prize diamond was missing. Missing is the next verb. There it is between the two. After opening the drawer, he then sees the prize diamond was missing, and there's a bit of drama for you as well. The semicolon. John opened the drawer, the prize diamond was missing. Number 3, the wedding invitations have all been sent out. 200 guests are expected. So we've got invitations being sent and we've got guests coming. Between them, we go after sent out. The wedding invitations have all been sent out. 200 guests are expected. Tom was very clever and worked hard. He deserved to pass all his exams. So we've got a slightly trickier sentence in the sense I've added the connective and in there, but hopefully you saw that after hard, so we've got that idea first there. The first clause is Tom being clever and working hard. Deserving to pass his exams comes next. We need a semicolon because those two ideas link together. Passing the exams comes from clever and working hard. We don't want to have a full stop there. We want those ideas to be together, but more than a comma. Finally, number 5. The threat was continuing to grow. Danger was waiting to strike. So hopefully you found that one straightforward. It goes in after grow. Danger was waiting to strike. I would point out to you here at this moment that sometimes you can overuse semicolons. Sometimes students feel that they need to use loads and loads to be clever. Don't. But I would say look at these sentences and imagine you could put in a dash. For those who aren't familiar, I am going to do videos for all punctuation marks at some point. You might already be there by now. But the dash is the line, like a straight line running across from left to right. And dashes would also work in all those sentences. So use dashes is what I always encourage my classes when I'm teaching them. They work in an almost identical way to a semicolon in the sense that they link clauses. So just to point out there that dashes would work. So a quick summary from me then. On the left in the yellow box, recapping what we've said in this video, semicolons link similar clauses. You can't just link separate ideas. The ideas in the clauses need to be about the same topic, as the examples on the right will show you. You need to have a full idea on either side, so you need to have a full clause. So these aren't for linking subordinate clauses, they are for linking full clauses. Sometimes can replace connectives, so you might be able to get rid of an and or a but in a sentence. Not always. Don't just go through dumping semicolons into places where ands and buts go. Also, semicolons shouldn't really have an and or a but after them as well, because they're doing that same job. I've put at the very bottom, they can't be parachuted into sentences. I get a lot of students who just try and drop them in, almost imagine them holding them above their work and just dropping them into their old work. You need to write sentences which need semicolons. There's a certain sound to them, as you will have seen by watching this video. So don't just think you can drop them in. You have to try and craft and build them into your sentences. I'll leave you with the ones on the right there. You might want to pause the video to read those properly to yourself, but they're all sentences with semicolons. The first 5 are the ones that you've done. The second 5 are different examples, and hopefully that's made the semicolons slightly clearer for you. As always, go off and do more research if you're not certain. If you're a year 9 or particularly a 10 and 11 watching this, make sure you are trying to have a go at using semicolons in your work. If you're never sure, ask your English teacher, but the best thing you can do is experiment. The more you get it wrong, then you'll learn how to get it right. So have a go. So there you go, semicolons, they're more than a winky face, as I think we've proven, and I'd say thank you very much for watching this video, and good luck to you when it comes to your exams. Bye bye.